Today we're making this chocolate fudge cake with a chocolate sponge that is super moist and chocolatey, combined with this glorious chocolate fudge frosting that's made without icing sugar and tastes like eating an actual piece of fudge. You'll be dreaming of this cake long after you've enjoyed it. You first want to preheat your oven to 180 degrees Celsius or 350 degrees Fahrenheit. And now we'll brew some coffee. I am using actual ground coffee to brew this coffee in a French press. You can just make instant coffee instead. So I've taken 2 tablespoons of ground coffee and then added 100 grams of water that is boiling hot. And then I've let it brew for about 5 minutes and then I use my French press to get the coffee. And you can just use 1 tablespoon of instant coffee and add 100 grams of hot water, and you'll add that to your cocoa powder. In addition to this hot coffee, we're also going to add some hot boiling milk. Now, the reason for adding this hot set of liquids, which is our hot coffee and hot milk, is we want to bloom the cocoa powder. And what that essentially means is when you add a hot liquid like hot coffee and hot milk into your cocoa powder, it makes your cocoa powder even more flavorful and chocolatey. So you will add the milk a little at a time, because if you add everything at once, it will form little clumps of cocoa powder and you don't want that. So you'll just keep whisking. And now into this, I'm also going to add some melted butter. Now, using butter in your cake adds a lot of flavor, but I also want it to be extra moist, and so I'm going to also add some neutral tasting edible vegetable oil. So a combination of butter and oil here not only makes your cake flavorful but also keeps it super tender and moist. So once you've added all of this, you just whisk it to combine. It is pretty hot right now because even the butter was quite warm. So I'm going to keep this on the side till it cools down slightly, and we'll start working on the eggs. So here in a bowl, I've taken 2 room temperature eggs. To that, I'm also going to add some vanilla extract, and now I'm using a mix of castor sugar and light brown sugar. Light brown sugar has molasses content in it, which helps keep the cake more moist. And with my electric beaters on the highest speed setting, I'm going to whisk the sugar and eggs for about 2 minutes. I'm following the principle that I usually follow when making brownies. While making brownies, I'll whip the eggs and sugar for about 8 minutes. Here, I'm not interested in getting a crackly top. I just want the eggs to be really whipped and the sugars to be dissolved. So I'll whip this for about 2 minutes, then I'll pour in the cool cocoa mix. It's very important that the cocoa mix has cooled down, otherwise it will scramble the eggs. So make sure that it has cooled down, and then you are going to go in with your electric beaters and mix this for just about 10 to 15 seconds until the eggs and the cocoa mix have combined really well. Now I'll use my spatula, fold everything, make sure everything is well combined. And now I will sift in my dry ingredients. So here I'm taking some all-purpose flour or plain flour, and then I've added baking powder, baking soda, and some salt. The reason for adding baking soda is there is a slight amount of acidity in both the cocoa powder that I'm using as well as the light brown sugar. And we want to neutralize this acidity so that it gives us a very light, tender cake. And so the baking soda helps do that. Now, once I've sifted in my dry ingredients, I am going to gently fold in the dry ingredients into this wet batter, and then I'm going to go in with my electric beaters on the lowest speed setting for just about 10 to 15 seconds. Then I'll stop the electric beaters. I'll scrape the sides and the bottom of the bowl, because as you can see, there are still a few pockets of those dry ingredients that I want to mix very well with the rest of the batter. Flour pockets that haven't broken down can really create an unpleasant texture and flavor in the cake. So you do want to scrape the sides and the bottom of the bowl, go back in with your electric beaters on the lowest speed setting for another 10 to 15 seconds. You absolutely do not want to overwork this cake batter right here, because you don't want to develop the gluten here. Now, because of how runny this cake batter is, I like to pour it into a jug, and then I like to add this into my cake tin. So I'm using 3 6-inch cake tins, which are greased really well, and the bottom is lined with parchment paper. And I will eyeball this and try to add equal amounts in all 3 cake tins. You can also double this recipe and make this cake in 2 8-inch layers, and you can also slit the layers into 2 parts, so you get a 4-layered 8-inch cake as well. Now, my oven only allows me to bake 2 cake layers at a time. So while the 2 cakes are baking, I'll keep the third one in the refrigerator, because I don't want the leavening agents to lose their effect. And the other two in the oven at 180 degrees Celsius for about 28 minutes. A skewer, knife, or a toothpick inserted in the center should come out clean. And while my cakes are baking and cooling, we'll make our beautiful, glorious fudge frosting. I just quickly want to walk you through my thought process of creating this fudge frosting using this technique. Essentially, I wanted the chocolate fudge frosting to, well, taste like an actual chocolate fudge. And when we are making an instant version of a chocolate fudge, the main ingredients in doing so are chocolate and condensed milk. You usually cook them to a certain degree, and then you set that in a mold and then cut them into blocks, and that is your chocolate fudge. I wanted to follow that same principle, but instead of taking it too far while cooking it, I wanted to add a few more ingredients to keep it really soft, pliable, and smooth while also tasting exactly like chocolate fudge. And so we don't use icing sugar or confectioner's sugar in this. We actually follow the process of making actual chocolate fudge, except we alter the ratios and the ingredients ever so slightly so that it is nice, smooth, and pliable, soft and glorious, while also tasting exactly like chocolate fudge. So I've taken a mix of semi-sweet and milk chocolate and chopped it really well, and then I have added that into a non-stick saucepan. The heat is off. I've also added some whipping cream, which has at least 35% of fat content, and then I'm using sweetened condensed milk, which is one of the main ingredients when you're making the instant version of a chocolate fudge. And then I've also added some instant coffee powder. It does not add a coffee flavor to your fudge frosting, but it just enhances the chocolate notes. I've also added some salted butter in this recipe. You can use unsalted butter as well. And then a generous helping of flake sea salt. I will turn on the heat on medium. At this point, all I want is for all of these ingredients to melt and combine together. You will then turn the heat on low. You don't want to cook this or burn the chocolate, so you will cook this on a low heat for about 5 minutes. You want to keep stirring it all the time, and after 5 minutes you'll take it off the heat and pour it into this bowl and let it cool down completely. You'll pop it in the refrigerator and let it set. You will start working on assembling the cake. I'm going to level the cake layers off like this, and you can see how soft, spongy, and moist the cake is. Our fudge frosting has also cooled down and is smooth and pliable like this. Now, if you're making the fudge frosting ahead of time and refrigerating overnight, it is going to set really firm and it will set into a solid block. Do not panic, just let it sit at room temperature until it becomes soft and smooth like this, and you're good to go. This fudge frosting is so fail-proof, you absolutely cannot go wrong with this. It works like a charm every single time. You'll now start assembling your cake by taking the first layer, adding generous dollops of the fudge frosting, placing the next layer, and then assembling it like so. And finally, you'll add some more of that beautiful, luxurious chocolate fudge frosting and frost the top and the sides of the cake. Inspired by the Matilda cake, we are going to be making this swirly pattern on the surface of the cake, and then you will pop this in the refrigerator to help everything set. You want the fudge frosting and the cake to melt really well. Now, I haven't soaked my cake sponge because the cake is really super moist on its own, but you can add a milk soak if you wish. And then we're ready to slice into this chocolate fudge cake, which is an absolute dream. Take a look at those distinct layers of the moist chocolate sponge and the ultimate chocolate fudge frosting. It tastes incredible. This is one indulgent chocolate dessert to treat yourself to. And speaking of indulgent chocolate desserts, you absolutely cannot miss this luxurious chocolate mousse cake that feels like you're eating chocolate flavored air. You've got to watch this next. Enjoy and happy baking!